In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to create an insect lure using Onshape. So first we'll come over to the Create button, and from there we'll select Document. Now in this case, I'm going to title this Bug Lure, but really you could call it whatever you want. Now the first thing you'll see when we come into Onshape are the 3 coordinate planes, top, front, and right. And just hovering the mouse over them will highlight them in yellow. I'll talk a little bit about the mouse commands. I strongly recommend using a 3-button mouse. That will allow you to do the following. So left click is select. So I can select different things with left click. In this case, I've selected all 3 planes just by left clicking on them each once. Clicking in blank space will deselect them. Also, right clicking and then selecting clear selection will deselect items. Next, let's talk about right click. If I right click and hold the button and then move the mouse around, this is called orbiting. This allows me to move the model in coordinate space without actually adjusting any of the geometry. I'm just changing my viewpoint. And you can see the view cube up here also moves when I do that orbiting. You can select different faces from the view cube, which will effectively do something very similar to orbit, but orbit gives you a little bit more flexibility. The third thing I'll show you here at the beginning is zooming, and you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. We're getting closer to and farther from the object. If you have a trackpad, you can also typically pinch, and that will zoom in and out on the object as well. And the final thing is panning. If I hold the middle mouse button and move the mouse around, we can pan left or right, up or down. Now there might be times when you either zoom out so far or you pan somewhere and you don't actually know where the object is. And so this little camera and render options button up here, if we click the down arrow and then select zoom to fit, that will bring it back onto screen. That's very handy. So for this first object, let's go ahead and select sketch. You could also push Shift S, and I'll select the top plane. You'll notice I have a little blue indicator up here instructing me what to do next. I'll select the top plane. Now, some people actually like to view the top plane orthographically like this, dead on, and then we can see clearly what we're sketching. I prefer to leave it in an isometric view much of the time, just so I remember that I'm just sketching a 2D shape. That's entirely up to you in terms of how you like to view it. So I'm going to start with an ellipse. An ellipse is kind of like an oval. What we'll do is we'll make a center point and then 2 axes, a major and a minor. Now, one important thing here is I'm going to hover over the origin. This is the point in space where all 3 planes, front, top, and right, intersect. And you'll notice I have a little white constraint appear. In this case, this means that the center of my ellipse is going to be fixed on that origin, and that is indeed what I want. So I'll click once to place the center, and then I'll move the mouse out. Now you can see we can move this ellipse around, kind of pull it whichever way we'd like to. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here because I only want this ellipse to be about 1 inch in length. Now notice again I have a constraint, so if I click right now, that major axis will be locked onto horizontal. If I put it over here, you'll notice that constraint disappears. It's not really anywhere, it's just randomly kind of diagonal in space. And if I click down here, now the major axis will be locked into vertical. In this case, I'm going to put it on the horizontal, and I'm going to make it about 1 inch. It doesn't have to be precise for this, but it'll just get you an idea. So there's the major axis. Now, the last click for the ellipse is the minor axis. In this case, we're going to make it about 1/2 inch. So we'll say something like that. And now we have our ellipse. Okay. Next, I am going to use the line tool. Now notice I still have the ellipse tool selected, so if I click again, I'm going to start an ellipse. We can deselect that by clicking up here, or you can also hit escape. Next, I'm going to use the line tool. And with the line tool, once again, I can hover over different entities and have different things come up as constraints that will automatically be applied. Now, a little sidebar here, you can always go back and add those constraints by clicking on the constraint tool and selecting those, and we will do that later. But it's faster often to just allow it to pick the constraints on its own. So this little constraint here that kind of looks like a T with two lines and a dot indicates that the line will be on the edge of the ellipse, but not in a specific location. Whereas this right here shows me that I'll be at one of the 4 coordinate points, one of the 4 quadrants of the ellipse. So we have those quadrants at the top and the bottom, the right and the left. So we're going to use this to create a line from the left side to the right side. And then we'll escape the line. You can also push escape. We'll start the line again. And this time, I'm just going to put the line, I'm not going to start it on the top quadrant, I'm just going to put it here, making sure that it's actually on the ellipse and not just out in space from here. And notice now, I can actually pull it so it's going to be on the ellipse, or I can move it so it's on the ellipse and vertical, and that's indeed what I want, on the ellipse and vertical. And I'll escape next. So each of those line points is just one click. Now some of this geometry is unnecessary, so I'm going to use my trim command, which is right here, looks like scissors, and I can click and drag a line through the different pieces of the ellipse that I no longer need, including that point. That was 2 click and drags. So I've got the trim command done, and I'll hit escape. Now I just want to point out right now that this geometry is blue because it's not fully defined, which means that we can click and drag it anywhere we want within the constraints. I'm going to undo those 2 moves. It is best practice to fully define everything, so we can use our dimension tool to fully define it. In this case, I'm just going to click on each entity and define those. And now, notice that it's turned black. This means that the object is fully defined. It's no longer movable in space. Now, for a lure like this, I don't suppose it's entirely required that you fully define it. However, it is recommended. And what I've said before, I'm going to undo all those dimensions, so we'll go back to the undefined state, is that sometimes a person will sketch something that's very complex, very freeform. I've actually seen where we've scanned line art in that a student has drawn, and it would take a very long time, an inordinate amount of time to fully define the sketch entities like that. So another thing you can do is just select the entire sketch, come up here, and use fix. Now this fix means that these lines will be fully fixed in space, not movable, not adjustable, proportion can't be changed. But in some cases that's okay. A lot of times when you're engineering a project, you don't want to do that because you want to be able to modify the dimensions later. But for this lure, I think that'll be fine. So I'm going to hit the green check to exit the sketch. And now we have our object kind of out here in space, just a little sliver. It's got no thickness, it's just 2-dimensional geometry right now residing on that top plane. So in order to give this some 3D, some depth to it, so it's actually an object we could print or create, we're going to use the extrude command. And I'll select extrude. We're on solid extrude, which is what I want. So first of all, it wants to know what regions to extrude, so I'll click inside, and notice that this is gray inside. That's good, that means it's a shape we can do something with. And it defaults to 1 inch, but we'll change that to 100 thou. And then I'll hit OK, hit enter, and push the green check. So now we have this object that has some thickness in space. Now, because I want this bug to have maybe some wing geometry, we're going to go ahead and create another sketch. Now, this sketch, once again, I'm selecting a sketch plane. I could select the top, but in this case, I want that wing to be on top of the bug here. So I'm actually going to pick the top surface as my sketch plane. So I'll click here. And now notice I have a new plane. If we actually look at the right view, you can see here that that new plane I'm sketching on is not the same as the original plane. Now, the best thing to do here probably is to use some of the geometry you've already created. So I'm going to use this use function, otherwise known as project, and I'll select these two edges. And I want the edges themselves, not the points that highlight, so make sure when you're rolling over it you get those line entities. So now I've got this line and this line. If you're wondering why this is important, these two lines are based on this extrude that I already created. So if I change the original extrude, these two lines will follow. Now we're going to use a spline here, and we'll just use a couple or 3 or 4 points here. 3, 4, to kind of give this, and then I'll hit escape when I'm done, to kind of give this some shape to it. And I'll hit escape again to get out of that spline tool. And now I can move this point around, but it's always going to be there on the, this point will always be on this line because of the constraints I used. And so that's fine. Let's clear our selection here so we're not moving both of those points. And then we can change this a little bit. Now, splines are one thing that can kind of be a pain to define, so I'm not necessarily going to go through and define that spline, but you could actually give coordinate locations for each of these XY points if you really wanted. The one dimension I am going to apply, though, is the distance from here to here, so that always remains not at the end. In this case, we'll just use 130,000 because that's pretty close to what it was. Could be anything. I just want to make sure that the wing is never longer than the object here on this side. We're finished with that sketch. And so now you can see that's just a 2D sketch that was created on the top surface. I'm going to extrude again. This time we're going to make sure we're on solid and not surface. Sometimes it'll pre-select surface with this, and you might think, oh, that looks pretty good. But the deal is here we're creating a two-dimensional surface instead of a solid object. And that's not going to 3D print anything if we're doing 3D printing, which is where I'm headed next. So instead we'll come over to solid. I'll pick this region as the solid, and we'll say 30 thou I think will be reasonable for this. And so now we've got this object here at the top. Now I do want to make sure I've got add selected as the extrude command. Before it didn't matter, but notice the difference here. I'm going to just show you these two. If I choose new, it's actually going to make two parts. The body as the part 1 and the wing as part 2. In this case, I want those two parts to be the same, so I'm going to add this extrusion to the original one. And you can see once it's created that there's only one face here and one face here, so this is indeed one object. All right, now you're probably noticing, or maybe not, that I haven't been doing any saving. Onshape automatically saves as I work, and that's super handy because you can always go back and look at things later. I'll show that version history a little bit once we've gotten a little further here. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new sketch, and I'm going to make an eye on this front face. So we're selecting a sketch plane again. This workflow isn't exactly what you have to follow. Sometimes people will select the plane first and then start the sketch command. For this video, I'm always starting the sketch command first, and then I'm going and selecting the plane just for consistency's sake. So we're now sketching on that front face. I'm going to start the line command, and this time I'm going to use that center constraint. So notice I can snap to the center or the edges of these lines without using the project convert. I used the project convert before because I actually wanted to use those two edges as part of this extruded shape. So I've got this line and this line over here as part of that shape. And then I made the spline here that was attaching to both of those. In this case, I'm just going to use these lines for snap references. So here I'm going to come to the center. Notice that midpoint shows up as a dot in the middle of a little line segment. I'll click once here, drag straight down, and look for that midpoint constraint again. So there we go, and I'll hit escape. And once you notice that line immediately turns black, that's because it's fully constrained. If this point is in the center of this line, and this point is in the center of this line, that line cannot move. Then we'll come up here and use a center point circle. We'll snap that center point circle to the midpoint of that line we just created, and then we'll pull it out. If we want to, we can give it a dimension. So yeah, 60,000 seems reasonable. Now it looks like I accidentally created another point. Actually, oh, nope, sorry, that's the origin. I was thinking maybe I create another point. And this is a good point to say, you know, it's never wrong to just take a moment and look around the object and see what you've done and what you're working on. Now our sketch is fully defined. We're finished with that, so I'll click the green check. And we're going to create an eyeball, so I'm going to use the revolve. I'll make sure I'm on solid revolve. First I want to select the regions to revolve, and I'll pick this region right here. And now I'm going to pick the axis to revolve that region around, which is this one right here. And we're creating part of a sphere, a hemisphere on the surface here. Now because I have add selected, it's just creating that hemisphere and merging it with the rest of the object. If I push new, it would actually create a full sphere as a second part. And there might be a place for that, but in this case I want this eye just to be part of the original object. Another option would be to select remove, and these options are also available in extrude, by the way. I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier, but you've got multiple options available here. Remove would take that spherical shape and subtract it from the original object. So you can see here there's like a little indentation in the end of it. And the final option is intersect. And intersect, it's not something I've actually personally used, but it is an option here. Intersect takes the revolved shape, revolves it, and then only gives you geometry left over where that revolved shape meets the original body. So in this case, that would be just the inside of that sphere. I'm going to use the add function here. And I'll push the green check, and now we've got that little sphere on the end. Now if you're wondering, this doesn't really look that much like a bug. Well, I'm not the world's best artist, but also we're not really finished yet. I'm going to use the mirror command here. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm really making use of these planes. So because I created that object exactly on the center when I created that ellipse, this front plane is right in the middle. And so I can use that, and without any extra work, I can mirror this whole bug around that center plane. Now it's true that you could create planes and do this in other ways, and sometimes it's necessary, but in this case, just doing a little bit of work up front and thinking about where you're creating the object in space will save you some time. So I'll click on mirror. It's going to ask me what I want to do. You can mirror parts, features, or faces. In this case, I'm just going to use the part. I'll select the part as the entity to mirror, and you can click on it in the graphics window, or you can click on it over here in the feature tree. And it's going to ask what plane you want to mirror around. So I'm going to select this as now I'm working on the plane, and I'll pick this. And we get a little preview here of what that's going to look like when it's finished. It's starting to look a little buggish. There we go. So we've got a little creature here, got a flat underside, some wings maybe on the top, and two eyes in the front. Now I'm going to pause here and talk a little bit about the version history, because sometimes I've seen people working on things and they maybe accidentally delete something, or they create some features and they're really not sure how to go back. There's a few ways to do that, but one of the handiest ones is to click on the version history here, and then you can expand all of this and you can see every feature that we've used to create this object. So we can go back to any of these steps in time and use that as our new starting point. So there's really not any need to worry about, oh, well, what if I've deleted this? What if I've broken it? It's almost impossible to completely break it. All right, the next little piece is to create the legs. And for these legs, I'm actually going to create some sketches on the front plane. And I'm going to do that in order to make use of the sweep feature. So we'll come over here, create a new sketch. I'll select the front plane. So we're sketching right in the middle of the bug. I don't suppose that's super important, but it's going to help knowing that. Now, one of the first things I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my line tool and I'm going to create a line using that side profile of the bug. Now in this case, you notice with my line tool, I'm trying to roll over things, but there's no edge here. So instead of doing that, probably the first thing that would be good to do is just to use my use project option here to project this surface onto there. So now that's okay. It says some of the faces couldn't be projected. It's probably talking about those spheres. But that's okay. Now I've got a line segment here I can use. So I can grab this line and I can snap to the middle of that other line or somewhere along it anywhere. So we'll just grab that, snap to the middle of this line segment, and I'm going to pull this line out. Now this line, I'm just going to make sure it's perpendicular to the original line, which would also be horizontal. And I'm going to hit escape now because that's where I want that line to be. Now notice that the line itself is black, but the dot is blue. That's just saying the length is kind of undefined, and I'm okay with that for now. We're going to create a circle. We'll put it on the end here, and we'll just click and we'll hit escape to get out of the circle tool. So the circle's diameter is unknown. It's available to be adjusted, and the circle's location, which I've placed on the end of that line. Since I snapped it there, the line and the circle are going to be at the same location. Start the dimension tool, set this dimension, and we'll say, maybe 0.15. I'm just kind of trying to make it look okay. You can escape and double click and change that to 0.13. You can always go back and change dimensions. There we go, that looks good. Go back to our dimension tool and we'll make these 30 thou in diameter. Okay, now that sketch is fully defined, everything's black, and I can escape out of that sketch. There we go. Now it's kind of hidden inside the object because I drew it on that mid-plane. But that's totally fine. There's no problems with that. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a path that's going to follow. Okay, I want to create a path for that leg to follow, and I'm going to give it a little bit of curvature here, so it's going to be interesting. Now you can really do this in any number of ways. I could curve the legs up or down. I could curve them side to side. In this case, I actually think I want to curve them side to side. So let me see if I can do this. We're going to come up to this feature right here, and this is for creating planes and surfaces. This is all what we call construction geometry. So I'll create a plane. I'm going to offset it from another plane. So we'll pick the top plane. And the offset distance, I'll say, you know what, we want a plane point to use as an offset distance. So there we go. And I'll hit check. So what I just did there was I said I want a plane that's perpendicular to my top plane, and the distance away it is away from that top plane is the same as the distance this point is away from the top plane. So let's clear our selection. I'm going to select this point so you can see that when I pick the right view, you can see the plane is in line with that point. And if I come back, so this is kind of handy, let's say that I adjust something on this sketch. So let's say, you know what, I actually want that, I want those legs a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So if I come in here and I edit this sketch, watch what happens here. Let's go ahead and edit the sketch. I'm going to click on that point, and I'm going to delete that midpoint constraint. Say I don't really want it in the middle. I want it a little bit lower. Okay, so I can just move this down. Let's go ahead and give it a dimension because I really don't like to leave it floating. So we'll say it's 30 thou. Okay. I'm not sure. Oh, I see. I accidentally deleted the coincident constraint as well. So what we can do is we can select that point, select this line, holding shift. Okay, I've got two things selected, and I actually just want those to be coincident. So now it's fully constrained. And we'll finish that sketch. We'll look here at this front plane. All right, and notice that the plane that I created, plane 1, moved down with that point. And that's because I defined that plane based on that point. So now we'll come to the top view here, and I'm going to want to make sure I get plane 1 when I start my next sketch. So of course we could just come back to the window and select it, but you can see here it's a little difficult to tell. So I'm just going to come over to the browser and select plane 1 as my sketch plane. And there we go. Now in this case, I'm going to go to the top view. Sometimes I go to the top view, sometimes I don't, but for this I'm going to. And I'm going to use another spline. Now I'm going to lock that spline onto the center of the circle that I started earlier. I'll bring it down, kind of curve it over, make it look a little bit maybe like a bug leg would. This is maybe a little longer than it needs to be. Well, junk, that didn't work. Click here, click there, click there, click there. Okay, and I'll hit escape. Apparently it doesn't work if I just use the keyboard. And if you want to, you can move those points around. I can pull it in a little bit. Maybe I think this is too far here. No, it's got a vertical constraint. Let's delete that. There we go. And you know, one thing I would say about splines is you can really get yourself into trouble by having too many spline fit points. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one here. Endpoints cannot be deleted. Okay, well let's try a different point. There we go. So a lot of times 3 spline points will be totally sufficient. And you can just click on middle points, apparently, not endpoints, and you can delete them. Make that really wild, but I think this is going to be fine. Okay, there we go. All right, so that's okay for now. I'll hit the green check. So now we've got 2 sketches we haven't done anything with. I've got this sketch, which has got a circle and some locating geometry. And I've got this sketch, which is just a spline. Let's clear that selection. And I'm going to start a sweep. A sweep takes a profile and then moves it along a path. So sweep. First I'm going to select the profile. So faces and regions to sweep. And let's see if it'll work like this. Perfect. You'll notice it didn't really want to select through there, but I could just select this. And then next I'll select the sweep path, which will be this. And we once again have the options of making a new body, adding it to the current body, removing it from the current body. So if you're thinking about, okay, maybe printing the body out of hard plastic and maybe putting like skirting material, something in here, you could use remove and leave a little hole in it to maybe glue it in. But in this case, I'm just going to add it again. And I want to merge it with all, so I'll hit the green check. Now we've got 1 leg Now I'm going to do something here to create a pattern of those features. And I'm going to select, you notice there's linear pattern, circular pattern, curve pattern, but we can do this pretty simply just by selecting linear pattern. Now here, I don't want to pattern the part, I want to pattern the feature. So I'm going to pick feature pattern, and from there I'll pick sweep 1 as the feature I want to pattern. The direction I want to pattern it, we'll just say we'll go along the front plane. Oh, that's not what I wanted. So we'll delete that, and we'll instead say along the right plane. There we go. Now instead of putting it where I want on the part, notice it just moved it in this direction. We want it to go in the opposite direction, and 1 inch apart is definitely too far. That looks more like it. Let's say we want an instance count of 3, and let's move them a little bit closer together. There we go, it's got 3 legs on it. It's kind of crawling forward. And we can do lots of things. We could create a second direction and pattern them vertically as well. We could skip some of the instances, say we didn't want the middle leg and we just wanted the back one. We could say, okay, let's skip this instance. But in this case, I'm actually just going to use that simple linear pattern to create 3 of them. And once again, we can just use this opposite direction to put them forward and backward. Now notice they're red when they're in this way because I said that I wanted it to merge with the current parts, and that's not going to merge it. So hit the green check, and now we have 3 legs as part of the bug. Now you're probably tracking, because I know you're smart, and you've watched this already, so you're learning. We're going to use mirror now. And I don't want to do a part mirror, I want to do a feature mirror. So we'll pick the linear pattern, and we'll use the right plane as a mirror. Now, if you're wondering, why does it only have 2 on that side? That's because I only added the 1 feature. So I'm going to select up here again, and I'm going to add the sweep to my features to mirror. And now we have all 3 legs on both sides. And that's good. Now this could have been done with 1 less mirror, but I just wanted to show you the difference between the part mirror and the feature mirror. So that gives you an idea of both. And there we go. That is a somewhat reasonable looking bug. It's some simple geometry and kind of gets us halfway there using revolves, extrudes, sweeps, different kinds of sketches, and also the mirror and pattern features. Thanks for watching.